So hello everyone. For those of you who don't know, I'm Ivar. I'm the COO of BizSpace. And in my presentation I will give you a different take on why Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption will lead the world more towards a state of freedom. So with that said, I want to show you this article. This article was actually linked to in the first Bitcoin transaction that was ever done. So the Bitcoin founder, he wanted to focus on the government's decision to bail out the banks during the financial crisis of 2008. And I believe he did this because he wanted to focus on that this current financial system we live in is not sustainable and there needs to be something to replace it with at some point. And maybe Bitcoin could be the best solution. So first of all, I'd like to ask you all, how many people here were taught in school how money is created? That's a few. Generally, this how money is created is a secret in society. Not a whole lot of people know how it works. So I'll divide it up as simple as possible to explain for you how it works. As you can't really understand the financial system without understanding the monetary system. So the first way in which money is created is when the central bank buys government bonds. Government bonds is basically a promise that the state is going to pay back the borrowed amount from the central bank plus interest rates on top. Now, the government or the central bank doesn't have this money before it actually appears there in the government-controlled account. So for each government bond that's purchased, new money is printed. And this is an ongoing process, and it's at the rate at which this process goes that decides what the interest rate is going to be. Now, this is the way interest rates have been controlled for about 50 years since we went on to this fiat monetary system. And it's not so effective anymore in controlling the interest rates. So what the central banks do now, it's what's known as quantitative easing. And that means that the central bank does pretty much the same thing, but they buy corporate bonds, thus flowing money straight into the stock market. And the final way in which money is created is when corporations or commercial banks give out mortgages and car loans and in-between bank loans and create the money in the same way. They don't exist before they appear there in the government's account or the bank accounts. So, in contrast, how are Bitcoins created? Well, Bitcoin, first of all, they are capped at 21 million. So there's never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin existing ever. Bitcoins are created as a reward for the miners to do their two tasks. One is writing the general ledger known as the blockchain, and two, when they confirm transactions. When they do confirm transactions over a certain period of time, that's known as a block, and for each block that's completed, a certain amount of Bitcoins are given as a reward to the miners to incentivize them to keeping the network running. And in Bitcoin, the inflation rate is determined. Everyone can look up and know exactly what the inflation rate is going to be. And in that way, it's completely different from the monetary system we have today. So, how does this translate into the financial system that we have today? We have seen several times only the last few decades financial crisis in ways of housing bubbles and stock market bubbles, commodity bubbles, and these don't happen on accident. These are actually, I think the Austrian School of Economics is very accurate on this, and the theories go something like this. So in today's environment where interest rates are completely controlled by the central banks, as interest rates go down, it means that a lot of economic activity that before was not profitable will now be profitable because it's cheaper to borrow money. And this means that people are able to borrow more for their houses, bid up the prices. Corporations are able to hire more people because they can make it cheaper, as it's cheaper to borrow money. And so you start a cycle where you have a whole lot of economic activity starting as a result of easy access to credit. The problem is that these same activities cannot be sustained when the interest rates go back up. And so what happens is that at one point the market gets fed up with borrow money, or the interest rates go up, and then all this economic activity has to stop. And so what happens is that you get a bust, you get a situation where the capital is going back to where it was supposed to be in the first place, and this is when businesses has to lay off people, housing prices will come back down, stock prices go down, and this is usually followed by another decline in the interest rates as the central banks wants to boost the economy again. The problem is, of course, that you simply reset the cycle and you have this ongoing boom and bust every so and so often. So if you change the monetary system, that doesn't mean that everything is just gonna be perfect. There will still be financial crises, but those will be more in local areas and local regions. For example, when there is major disruptive innovations coming along, it will hurt certain regions that are based on certain businesses that will be outcompeted. Same goes for natural disasters that may harm certain areas that are very weather dependent on their businesses. But when it comes to the global scale financial crisis that are a result of the interest rate policies, those will still be there. So you don't really need to go very long back in history to get examples of this happening. There was the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s, early 2000s. There were the housing bubbles in 2008 with the year's derivative bubble on top. And in the years after that, we've seen sovereign debt bubbles in where the governments themselves have grown too large because of their easy access to borrow money and thus funding all their expenses. And so when they suddenly cannot borrow money anymore, they need to also cut in all their expenditures. So the governments themselves are in a bubble. And I think this is illustrated very well in this chart where you see the US stock market in red and you see the interest rates in blue. And as you can see, the interest rates have gone down pretty much ever since the 80s, all the way until the early 2000s. In the same way, the stock market rose up all the way until the early 2000s, and as the interest rates went up and the credit-fueled bubble cannot be sustained anymore, the markets had to come down. And as I just showed you, the response is to lower the interest rates, and that simply created a new cycle. Same thing happened in 2008 as interest rates went up. Stock market fell down and interest rates were lowered again, and we're now at record low interest rates and record high stock market. And of course this is not sustainable at all, because you have two options. You can stop printing money, or you can higher the interest rates, in which the markets will have to come down as they're based on this ability to borrow money, or you need to continue creating money, which then in turn will devalue the currency. So you can't really have both at the same time. And so what would a Bitcoin economy look like? Well, in Bitcoin there is no single entity that's able to control the interest rates. So that means that the interest rates will be dependent on what's actually going on in the economy. So the more prosperous a place is, the more capital is saved up, the more easily access it is to borrow money, thus driving interest rates down. And as poorer communities where there's few resources saved up, interest rates will be high as there are more scarce resources. And so you won't have these credit fueled bubbles, and you'll have less malinvestments, investments that should not have been taking place in the first place. And the inflation is limited. You can't just print money as they do today, and you'll therefore have more stable currency over time and more valuable currency over time. And that is why I think all of this leads to more economic freedom, which then in turn will lead the world towards a state of freedom. And that's why I'm so excited about Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption as a whole. Thank you very much.